Hey, and welcome everybody. I'm RJ Moeller. I'm one of the producers of the Live Not by Lies series. Joining me as always is our director extraordinaire, Isaiah Smallman. Hello,
Hello.
welcome back. Welcome back to
Thank
the
you.
real motherland. So for folks who are watching this, you are probably already aware that we ran a great campaign to raise some funding. Thank you for your support. And we have now utilized some of that funding to send our team over to Eastern Europe, to Prague and Bratislava in particular. And in a second here, I want Isaiah to share, what he saw, what he ate, who he talked to. We'll get into all of that, but we just wanted to start off by saying thank you for anybody watching this for getting us to this point. It's so hard to make anything, film, TV, doc series, anything. So to be to this point is thrilling, to not only have some money in the door, to have boots on the ground, rolling cameras. Rod, who we'll be talking with in the next segment here, will share more. But Isaiah, welcome back. How was it, man?
It was awesome, is the short answer. Excuse my voice. We all got sick. I'll give you all the highlights. We all got sick. We're all jet lagged. We were all jet lagged during the trip. We're all jet lagged now. But it was awesome. We had some incredible interviews. Yeah, we ate some incredible food. Excuse me, I really am jet lagged. It's funny. It's only 9 o'clock, but it's about whatever that is, 3 in the morning in Prague. So, but yeah, I'm trying to think. Best meal we had was in Slovakia. Sorry, Prague. Don't tell anybody I said that. But Prague is also just absolutely beautiful in every way, and the food was great. Yeah, we had a great time.
I know it's we don't have to go beat by beat, but just give us, for folks, a lot of people have never traveled internationally, or just the idea of taking a crew. What are a few of the beats of the story of how you got over there? I know you guys had delays and stuff, but what was that like, taking, what was it, 7, 8 people, heading across the ocean, going to a foreign country? Just a few of your initial impressions of even just the travel getting over there.
Yeah, totally. So, well, I'm in Chattanooga, so in order to kind of all be on the same flight for the most part with our producer Dave and a couple other people that we went with, we kind of converged in Nashville. So I did a little 2-hour drive up. We all drove to the airport, flew from Nashville to Detroit, got stuck in Detroit. Unfortunately, it was, I think, some snow related stuff. Not stuck, but delayed. And then eventually we flew from Detroit to Amsterdam. The problem is, by the time we got to Amsterdam, it was an overnight flight. We had missed our flight to Prague. And so instead of immediately turning around and jumping on a flight to Prague, we got stuck. And so we stayed in Amsterdam, I think, an extra 10 or so hours. The upside being we got to go to Amsterdam for a few hours, which is pretty cool. I did not expect to do that. The downside being that we were supposed to have a day off in Prague before we started shooting, and that did not happen. But anyway, so we went to Amsterdam and then hopped on a smaller plane and went to Prague. So, it was wild. I mean, we've got a lot of gear. So, gosh, this is terrible live stream entertainment here. I'm just yawning my head off.
We're giving people the real authentic
thing.
experience. These guys are fresh off the boat, as it were.
Yes.
Getting home just in the last couple days here.
Yeah, so we got in and checked into our hotel, and that was pretty late at night. And then the very next morning we had a 7:30 call time. Met in the lobby and went out and started interviewing people. It was pretty wild. So, yeah, lugging cameras and gear, and there were let me think. Yeah, there were several of us who kind of came from the States. That would be me, Dave, Andrew, who are kind of represent the directing and producing contingent of folks, and then there was Brad and Yosua, who are DP and our second cameraman. we all were coming from the States. And then we met up with our fixer in Prague, a guy named Jakub. This is such a great, actually, I'll share this. This is so great. So
Please.
very typical, if you're especially producing internationally, you hire a local fixer who's effectively like your local producer. And, they just know the language, especially if it's a different language. They know the language. They know. Oh, wow, this is ridiculous. I'm very sorry to everybody out there. They know the language. They know where to eat. They just know all the basics. They do all the things.
Yeah.
They know how to get permits from the government, whatever it may be. Anyway, so we hire Jakub, really nice guy. He fixes stuff for, basically big shows, Netflix stuff, whoever's coming to Prague, which, believe it or not, a lot of stuff gets produced in Eastern Europe because it's relatively affordable and it's beautiful, and you can kind of make it look like anywhere in Europe, so a lot of people like to produce things there. So anyway, Jakub's a very well-established guy. And he says to our producer, when he says we'd like to work together on these dates, he says, I actually have something else those days, but my mom was a signatory of the Charter 77, which is the basically the group in Czechoslovakia at the time that was responsible for organizing the main resistance against the Soviet groups, the Soviet regime. And so he says, my mom was a signatory of Charter 77, and I grew up going to church with Camilla Bendova and her family, which is the people you're coming to interview. And I haven't seen her in a couple of years. I'm a huge fan of what you guys are doing. I'm totally dropping the other thing that I'm supposed to be working on, and I'm going to help you guys out. And so it was kind of the first of numerous amazing serendipitous blessings, really, that just sort of made the project come together. Jakub ended up being a terrific help throughout the project, and it was just so awesome. Of all the people we could have hired, that was just this very strange connection. But yeah, we dove right in and started doing interviews, and if we could play even some, I put together a string of little B-roll shots that
let's
just
share
sort
that
of
with
give a
folks so
little
they
bit
can
of the
see.
flavor. Yeah.
And you can give us some commentary over that and
yeah,
use
totally.
that up. But
yeah, I don't want to give
that's the
away
purpose
too
of these
many of our
things.
best shots, obviously, but I thought we could show some stuff.
Yeah, just to show people we actually are out making the movie, making the series.
We actually did it. Yep. So yeah, here's some stuff at Camilla's apartment, which I just mentioned. Maybe the next thing we can show could be there should be a clip called City B-roll, which we could show. But this is actually really interesting. These are old, basically. Well, I'm trying to think. Contraband publications called Samistads. I'm going to be talking about this with Rod a little bit too. This is Camilla Bendova, who's the woman that we mentioned, who is really a true hero, and she allowed us into her apartment and basically let us take over the place for like 3 days. So as you can see here, this is us driving into Prague. It was snowing, which kind of added this amazing layer of interesting stuff. This is the city of Prague itself from up on the castle hill. It's a really beautiful, absolutely gorgeous city. There's right below us. I don't have a good shot of it here. We of course have some B-roll of it. There's this amazing, so there's another church. There's a lot of churches. Prague is not a particularly religious place anymore, which is interesting. It's a little different. It's very atheistic, but there are these amazing trolleys. I also love how that sign is kind of flickering because of the frame rate. Anyway, there are these amazing trolleys everywhere, and they all use the same tracks. And so there's old school trolleys like that. And this is actually outside of Camilla's apartment. If you look up on the third floor, that's where her apartment is. So anyway, I just a couple of fun shots to to kind of whet everybody's appetite a little bit. There will be more shown during the interview with Rod as well. But yeah, everything was perfect. It was challenging because of the snow. It was cold. Everything gets wet, but it looked beautiful. It kind of had this amazing quality to it that I think really fits with the story. It felt kind of cold and dark, and I think for a lot of people, that's just the way it felt for a long time. So it's really interesting in that way.
Yeah. Always winter and never Christmas, right? That's sort
Yes.
of Narnia-like feeling. Okay,
Yes.
so we actually have some folks that have a couple of questions for us that I'd love to get to before we get to the conversation that you had with Rod. I also want to give a couple of quick things, just plugs, so to speak. Obviously, right now the initial crowdfunding phase is over. Again, thank you. Please follow us on Facebook, on Instagram. The story that we want to tell, it's also the story behind the story. It's the story of how we're, the stories of how we're making the story and telling the story, which is really, sharing shots and footage like we just did. We want fans, supporters, people that have invested their hard-earned money into this to feel like it's a big community, it's a big family that's a part of this thing, and you guys are certainly a key part of that. If anyone's wondering, I did not go on this first leg of production. For companies like mine that are working on multiple projects, some of the crew goes on one. I'm going to be going on future trips. We're going to be releasing information in the weeks and months to come about what those future trips look like, where we're going to be going, who we're going to be sitting with. So I'm very jealous, especially when I started getting pictures from the team of what you guys were eating at different restaurants, which is always my favorite part of travel. But I'm so glad you guys went. I'm so glad you guys made it back safe. Let's get to a couple of questions, and then we'll get into Rod's conversation. Cindy, a guild member, thank you, Cindy. Have you encountered resistance from the various governments to try to tell this story? Zay, did you guys, with your fixers, was there any conversations about what local municipalities and politicians and leaders might think of what you guys were doing?
Yeah, thankfully, so far we've been in good shape, especially with foreign governments. I think the memory of communism there, while it's fading, especially among young people, there's not a lot of favorable approach to it there, and so we definitely were not met, thankfully, with any resistance on that front. There has been some on the domestic front, and I'm maybe not sure how much I can talk about it at the moment because it's still sort of a open issue. So maybe we'll talk about that in a future live stream. I will say though, yeah, actually we have been targeted on the banking front. I'll just leave it at that. And have been, it's resolved for the time being, but had some serious difficulty and temporary issues related to our banking situation that
For folks, sorry to interrupt, but for folks that think, it's always hard to tell when people in the press and the media and different outlets are talking about persecution or unfair treatment for certain types of stories or storytellers. All we'll say for now, and we will share more as the project goes on, but yeah, I'm now a believer that there are folks that don't want these kind of stories told, and not just in some theoretical sense. Let's put it that way. So, but yes, it's great to hear that you guys didn't encounter any problems while you were over there. Micah, if you had another question, let's get to that, because I do want to get to the conversation with Rod here, but we want to hear from the folks. Looks freezing in Prague. Does the extra challenge to work in the cold make it fun or harder?
Very good question. Both. It definitely makes it harder. Lugging a 25 plus pound bag of gear and or a camera, especially, it's always a little tricky, but when the snow is actively falling and you're trying to keep the camera dry, and then you're walking up a cobblestone street that's kind of pretty steep and, now covered in ice, it starts to get a little crazy. But at the same time, as you can see, and again, the more we share, you'll see more of that. I mean, it really also, it just makes everything awesome. It looks beautiful. So, it depends. It depends on how close you are to get to shelter and all the other things. You definitely learn in production how to work around those sorts of things. But yes, definitely both for sure.
Yeah, well, Tom Cruise and big Hollywood productions pay a lot of money to get things that look like snow or look like rain. So when you can actually go out in the elements and capture it, you're now what's his name, Inarritu, and shooting The Revenant,
Yes.
with natural
Yes.
light for your documentary. I guess we have one more question. Let's get to that, and then we'll get on to our conversation with Mr. Dreher. What other ways can we help? James, thank you. Great question. Um, if you are the praying sort, I would say continue to pray for this project. There is, this is a historical story, it's a political story, it's a cultural story, but it's also a spiritual story at its core. And what we hope to do is honor the folks like Camilla and others that lived through it, and also analyze what's going on in our world today. And these are weighty, heavy issues, and we're not thinking that we're the perfect people or the only people that should be analyzing this. Obviously, we partnered with Rod because of his tremendous book, and we're going to these experts. But we're out on the road. Isaiah married, he's got a family. Dave, the whole team, we've got people counting on us. We've got people supporting us. And so, yeah, that would be one thing I would say is certainly prayer for the project. You can follow us as it's been popping up here on the screen. On Facebook and Instagram. Shoot Isaiah, tweet Rod. Let us know, what you're thinking of things, questions, people we should be talking to. I don't know, Zay, any other thoughts of how folks could be supporting us here?
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. I'd say, if you are not already getting email updates, that could be really a great way just to stay in touch. If you're here, I'm assuming you have. Tell people about it. Past, this piece here would probably be a great introduction for new people to the project. We opened with the torch video again so that people could see that and kind of get reacquainted with things. We know it's been a minute since we've sort of explained what the project is. So this is a great chance for people to start to follow along. I mean, this is when it gets really fun. So as soon as this is available, which is basically now, send the link to your friends and say, hey, I'm part of this really interesting project, or I'm following along with it. You should check it out too. They're going to be doing a lot more updates. I mean, this is really the beginning. This is the first trip of probably several, possibly many. The dad with kids part of me is hoping several, not many, but we'll get the job done however we need to. And there's going to be a lot more updates coming that, again, whether that's on sort of the smaller updates on Facebook, whether that's through these, we're going to be sharing footage. We're going to be sharing stories. As you'll see in a minute, I mean, Rod and I were getting into just some of the highlights of some of the interviews. And this is when it gets really fun to follow along with this project. So if you know anyone who would appreciate this and would resonate with the messaging, tell them, send them a link, get them the link, live not by lies .live, or you can find us at angel live, live.angel.com, right?
Angel.com, angel.com/live.
/live.
Yeah, I know I'm so used to promoting the invest page, but it's angel.com/live. So yes, again, thank you guys so much for even asking that. We really appreciate the support, and we feel it. And we've heard from many of you personally, and through social media. So again, just to be clear, because a lot of times for those folks who aren't filmmakers and don't do this for a living, it can always be a little confusing. We are currently in production. We are out, as Isaiah said, there's going to be more trips. We're going to be filming more, capturing more. If you guys have ideas of folks that you think we should be talking to, again, hit us up on social media and share that. But for now, I want to get to your conversation with Rod, where you guys unpack more of what just transpired in the last week and a half or so. So yeah, let's turn it over to you and Rod and hear what you guys had to talk about.
Okay, great. So we're here with Rod, and we're just going to jump into everything we've been doing. Obviously, Rod and I are coming back from a long trip on the road. Let's just put it that way. It's been well, it wasn't quite as long for you, Rod, because you didn't have to very far. Yeah.
But yeah, it was an incredible experience for me. I mean, most of these people I had seen before. I interviewed them for the book, but it was such a treat to see them through the eyes of you guys on the American crew, because I knew about these stories. I had been just staggered by them before, by the courage and the faith of these people. And to watch you all react to it was just such a joy. And it got me excited about the project all over again, to be honest. And one thing in particular that stands out to me after this week was when we went to the underground chamber. It was a hidden chamber under a house in Bratislava where the Slovak underground Catholic Church produced samizdat, illegal material, for years to support the life of the church, hymnals, prayer books, things like that. They had done this using an offset printer that was smuggled in piece by piece by Open Doors International, an evangelical organization based in the Netherlands that supported and still does support the persecuted church. A team from Open Doors smuggled it in. A second team came in and reassembled it in that hidden room, and to help the life of the church. Jan Samulchik, the underground church historian who guided us there, was part of that movement. And he told us on camera, he said, this was ecumenism at its best. This was our evangelical brothers and sisters supporting us Catholics. And what was so touching about that was our director of photography, Brad Knoll, went down there in the room and he got tears in his eyes. He told us that when he was a little boy, his mom and dad used to support Open Doors International financially and through prayers. They used to pray as a family for the persecuted church. And for him now, in the middle of his life, to be there in a hidden room where the church was kept alive by the prayers and the gifts of Open Doors, it was a huge moment for him. He said he took photos and sent them back to his mom. And that was one of these moments, Isaiah, I think you probably felt the same way, when the meaning of this project really came down. There was another moment, too, when we were in the home of Dr. Sylvester Krčméry, who died in 2013. He was a layman, a lay Catholic, who was one of the founders of the underground church, spent 14 years in prison. We were in his humble little bedroom in Bratislava, and I looked on the shelf and saw a copy of his memoir he wrote in 1996 about prison. I have an English copy here called This Saved Us. And it's a thin book, as you can see. It was a manual of how they survived brainwashing. And it talks about how when he went into prison, he went in there with the mindset that I am God's probe here. I'm given an opportunity to serve Christ by sharing in his suffering and witnessing to people. And that got him through that and a regular prayer life. I noticed, though, when I opened to the first pages of the book, there was a signature on there. And it said, it was in handwritten, it said to Dr. Sylvester Krčméry, who bore witness to Christ and his church, with blessings, John Paul II. It was the signature of Pope John Paul, now St. John Paul II. And it was, I'm getting chills thinking about it right now. That's how near history was to us. And to be with you all in Kamila Bendova's apartment in Prague, this old apartment, which has been unchanged since the communist times. It's like a time capsule. To know that in that apartment,
let's pull up some video of that. Let's pull up some video of that while you're talking through it, because I've got a little, cut together some clips, and you can kind of, as we're going through it, Rod, you could even kind of point out some of what we're looking at as well.
Sure. Yeah, this apartment, that's Kamila Bendova there in her apartment. That round table right there, that's her dining room table. At one point, we asked if we could move it back so we could film. And she said, no, don't do it. This table belonged to Václav Havel and his wife, Olga. Havel was the leader of the opposition there and the first president of a free Czechoslovakia. She said that the table had collapsed in the Havel's house when the communist government's secret recording apparatus in the ceiling above them fell down and broke it. The Havels were going to throw it out, But the Bendas said, no, we'll repair it. She said, we repaired it, but we're not sure how good it was repaired. So it's been there for 30 years unmoved. But that table right there that you're seeing, history was made there, and history was made in this apartment. This is where the dissidents gathered to talk, to plan, to pray. And man, to be in this place and to realize that this is just everyday life for these people, it was incredible. And you can see that dear woman, man, what an iron lady she is. She raised 6 kids under communism. Her husband was in prison for 4 years. She told the story about how, when he was in prison, the communists said, look, if you will take your family and get out of the country, we'll let you go. And he was thinking about it because he knew Václav, her husband, knew how hard it was on her and the kids with him gone. But she said, no, we can't do it. If we leave this country, if we take the easy way out, what will that say to all the people in this country who are suffering and who look to us as an example? You stay there in prison, keep praying, we've got this. I mean, that's the kind of courage that American Christians and European Christians are going to need in the future that's fast coming. And I'm so grateful to our supporters that we get to tell these stories. And look, Camilla and some of these people we interviewed, they're old. They're not going to be around much longer. And we got them on camera telling their stories. Thanks be to God. Yeah. And thanks to our supporters.
Well, yeah, totally. And this is such an interesting moment here that we're showing, which is recorded at a Q&A, which took place after a theatrical production. This is the director on the right. That's Camilla, who was asked to speak after the production. And it was so interesting because it was going on while we happened to be in Prague. We weren't there for more than 3.5, 4 days. But it was a play that was written specifically about people who are living under totalitarianism with the Soviets and are sort of grappling with the reality that a lot of people did cave under the pressure and ratted out their friends and family. And so in this case, there's actually this play that we're watching now. It was really well done, but it was specifically about a family in which one of the parents actually gave out information about the rest of the family in exchange for the ability to not have to go to jail. And then later, the son, 20 years later, the son finds out that his dad actually complied with the secret police, and he's very resentful of his father for that. This is the son. And it was just fascinating to me to be able to watch that story unfold on stage because, again, not only because it was such a great insight into the difficulty that a lot of these people had to live with for so long, but also because it just happened to be happening when we were there. Camilla, as one of these people, is still fighting this battle right now because they're looking around and they're saying the youth need to be educated about these things. We need to be telling people their history because a lot of people don't know it. And even in a place like Prague, a lot of young people don't actually know the lengths that people went to, people like Camilla, to make sure that they have the freedom that they have now, let alone people like us in the States. So that was really telling. Yeah, it's really interesting too. One of the things you can see in that video, and we don't have to show it again necessarily, but what Camilla's showing us in another clip, she's actually flipping us through and reading from some of the letters that her husband Václav wrote her from prison. And it's really interesting. She was telling us about all the particulars of kind of how he was able to write. It was very certain. There were 4 pages. And so she's a mathematician. So she actually did some math to try to figure out how he could format the pages to fit the most content on the same page. And here's this stuff here is actually really interesting old documents from the 70s. This is actually a samostat, the exact kind of documents that were printed in that underground printing room. And she's got a whole giant archive of all of those. So that was really interesting to be able to see all of that. But yeah, no, you're right. This history is incredibly contemporary. It's not old. It's very, very new. And it was just, you really feel that when you're over there.
Yeah. And in Slovakia, I don't know if you had these conversations, but at least one of the people we interviewed said to me, I really hope this movie, we're able to see it in this country because so many of our young people just don't know the history for whatever reason. And they're falling back into the same habits of totalitarianism. It's a softer version, but it's coming because they don't know and they're not reading. But this video is not only going to, this series we're doing, documentary series, is not only going to help prepare the American church, it's also going to prepare the European church. And just yesterday in Budapest, I had a lunch with a young Slovak Catholic who is part of the fellowship there in Bratislava. He wasn't in Bratislava when we were there, but he was curious to find out what our experience was like. It kind of brought tears to my eyes. He said, ours is a really small country. And a lot of us who are involved in this Christian fellowship for years have wondered, will our story ever be told? Will anybody ever know what was done here? The kind of, Christian giants who stood up, whose names are forgotten outside of this country, even forgotten in this country. And to know that you all were there with your crew and you're telling this story and they won't be forgotten means so much to me. And man, I just made me realize what a blessing it is that we were there, and we're going to be in other places too when you guys come back over here. But it's so powerful, and there's, as good as I think the book was, and as powerful as the reactions American readers have had to the book, when you see these people's faces, when you hear their voices, it's a different thing. One of the people that I remember the most, Isaiah, from our event, from our interviews, was the little thin guy with the walrus mustache, Ludek Bednar in Prague. We sat in Camilla's apartment and interviewed him. Very slight little merry man. And I remember asking him, where did you find the strength to resist? Because he and his wife were in the opposition. And he said, well, it wasn't that hard. Once you decide that you're not going to lie, that you're not going to live by lies, everything becomes easy. Well, of course, it wasn't easy because these people had to deal with prison and torture and all of that. But it was that bedrock refusal to live by lies, that determination to live in truth no matter what, that made the difference. And Ludek went on to say something that we heard over and over again over the course of the week, that you had to decide that you didn't mind being an outsider, that if you didn't get included, if you couldn't advance professionally and all that for the sake of the truth, then that was just how it was. And I noticed, we were talking about this on the last night we were there, that a lot of these people, they really struggle to tell you where they found the strength to do this. And I think it's not because they don't know, it's because they don't want to brag. They're very modest people. I remember as a young journalist, when I was in Washington in the early 90s, I was covering Congress, and I had to do a story on the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and I had to do a piece interviewing members of Congress who had been in the D-Day invasion. An older military correspondent said, look, you're going to have a tough time with this because these guys, they're not going to want to talk about their valor because they're that modest. I felt the same thing about these wonderful heroes of the anti-communist resistance, that they didn't want to talk about their bravery. They just said, this is what we do. And
no,
do you remember? Go ahead. I was going to say, I want you to talk about meeting Sylvester Krčmery's sister. She's the only surviving member of that family. She's 88 years old, and she wouldn't talk. We were told by Jan Somolchik that she wouldn't talk to Slovak journalists. She's never given interviews about it. She gave one to us. And in that interview, which you conducted, she talked about what Silvo Krčmery said in his 1954 trial, where he was tried for treason. But they called him a Vatican spy because he worked for the church. Do you remember what she said, his words?
I need to remember the exact phrasing because it's so good. So yeah, maybe you can even pull it up.
Sorry,
I'll let you
put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I mean, yeah, no, I would love for you to do it because I want to get it right. I mean, it's so perfect. But I'll even set up the interview, which was so great. And this is such a fun. We were debriefing this a little bit. This is one of those great kind of behind the curtain production realities. Is there's so many things that go into getting these interviews. I mean, how many of there were us just carting around 8, 9 people on a good day, 10, I guess. We've got, it'd be interesting even just to talk about the crew. We had a translator, we had a sound person, we had 2 camera people, we had me, we had you, we had our producers, which were 2 of them. We had our local fixer. We sometimes had a couple other people who were helping us with various stuff. And these people that we're interviewing they're not professional media personalities. And so we roll up in there, we've got 10 cases worth of gear, and we've got a bunch of people, and we're trying to take our shoes off because it's snowing and muddy outside and all this kind of stuff. this was our last night in Bratislava, and actually we had attempted to interview this woman Gabriella the night before, and we were told, yeah, like she doesn't really ever do interviews. I don't think she's ever done a single one, and right. And it didn't work out the night before, and so it got scheduled for the following night. It's already kind of getting late, and we had already been working for at least 10 hours or so, and so we were like, okay, is this going to work? And she had recently been ill, and so we're sitting at this cafe near her apartment, and we're like, I don't know how much I was saying this to you, Rob, but I was thinking there's like a 75% chance that this interview is not happening tonight. Like there's a good chance it won't. And the tired 7 days in straight production part of me was thinking I might be okay with that because, we didn't know she was going to be amazing. You never know. Sometimes interviews don't work out so well. Anyway, long story short, we finally get up there and she's so nervous. I mean, visibly very, very, very nervous. And thankfully her daughter, who is a wonderful woman, was able to kind of help her calm down. You and I sat there and just talked with her a little bit about what we wanted to talk over. And I think she very quickly sensed that we are, very easygoing, kind of respectful people. And so she's kind of slowly started to calm down. And I thought, okay, we're going to do the interview, but best case scenario, she's going to have a hard time opening up. This is going to be really tough for her. Because again, there's cameras at her face and there's all these people and there's lights. Well, I mean, as soon as we got going, she just flipped a switch and all of a sudden she was just down. She was all in and just electric personality and just wonderful. You've said this a million times, but, just so peaceful and a different level of sort of trust in God, I think, in a lot of ways than what I have. And a lot of that's rooted in their backstory. I mean, we were kind of there to talk about her brother, but we started asking questions about how they grew up. And it turns out her father also went to prison during World War II. And they had all sorts of hardships throughout their lives that were really, I think it's now clear, preparing them for this great work of ministry, really as a family. But I mean, decades and decades of struggle, financially, spiritually, physically, all of it. The whole family has suffered immensely. And yet it was so obvious that there was no resentment. There was no anger, really. There was just total peace, total trust in God. But yeah, I would love for you to read what Kirch Mary said, because I'll tee it up. We went in thinking we got to get her to say it. We got, it's her brother's famous words. We got to get her to say it, but she's not an actor. I don't know how this is going to work, but she totally nailed it. And it was so awesome. And all of us were just looking around like, she just delivered that whole speech. It was amazing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the speech that Silvo Kirchmary delivered in his final defense before the military tribunal, and he knew he was going to be convicted. It was a kangaroo court. But he said these words: "You have the power, but we have the truth. We don't want any of your power. We're happy with the truth." And that's, there it was. Right there, live not by lies. And Gabriella had told us that their father had raised them to not tolerate lying at all. One of her brothers got caught in a lie when he was young. The dad kicked him out of the house. Now the kids convinced dad to let him back in, but that kid never lied again. But that's where it all comes from, Oh, and remember the story she told about how their father once put his overcoat on backwards and went out in public, looking like a fool. But he did that to teach the kids that don't care what other people think, always do the right thing. Incredibly powerful.
Amazing. And there were so many serendipitous little moments like that where, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, one thing that was new to me on this project was when we interviewed Timo Kriška, the young photographer,
we actually
filmmaker.
have a little clip of his interview just visually, so you could talk over that. We can actually see Timo. Yeah, it'd be great. But go ahead.
Yeah, man, what a deep man he is. He's studying for the priesthood now. He's a Greek Catholic. That's one of the rites of the Catholic Church where they allow priests to marry, and Timo is married. But man, what a serious guy. And he's the one in the last chapter of Live Not by Lies who went and did a photography project interviewing members, Christians who had gone to prison for their faith. Now they were out. A lot of them were still poor. And he talked about the peace that passes all understanding that he saw in every one of these people he talked to. He compared them to the desert fathers of the early church who went out into the desert to pray and to find God. Well, all of these people, these contemporary, ordinary Slovaks that he talked to, were sent to prison and stripped of everything they had. They had no freedom. They had nothing but their faith in Christ. And it marked them. It changed them. And they came out of prison changed by it in a good way. And Timo was so deep talking about it and how it changed his own heart just to hear the testimonies of these men and women.
Yeah, Timo was one of my favorite people to meet. And I think it was because you're right. He's just, well, he feels like an old soul, you know, he's got some serious depth to him. And, you talk about this in the book, but he did some amazing groundwork to identify some of these stories. He's got an amazing book, which I lugged home about 6 copies of it, but a really nice coffee table book with gorgeous portraits of a lot of dissidents and political prisoners who are no longer living. And some of the stories in there are absolutely incredible. But you're right. He talked about, kind of comparing the desert fathers of the first couple centuries to the prison fathers, I think is what he was calling them now. And I think that's such a wonderful way to think about it. Yes, and mothers. And it's sort of an interesting idea. But yeah, it's like the new wilderness is, or at least in the 20th century, the new wilderness, the new place to kind of go conquer was the prison. And I think one idea that he brought up that so resonated with, I think, what the book says, as well as what I'm excited about in the series is, he quoted a great Orthodox writer and priest named Alexander Schmidman, but who wrote, comfort and convenience, these are the things now that are going to become, even more dangerous to us. And I thought his commentary on that was really fascinating and really in line with what we're doing. But really amazing guy. And it was so fun getting to hang out with his family. I mean, that was so cool because he's got several great kids, and Rod was in total baby mode. He was just, the little 1-year-old was just crawling all over Rod, and Rod could not have been happier.
Oh, I was so happy. And, listening to Timo talk about these experiences and link it to the experience of the Desert Fathers. I mean, here we are 1,700 years later, and we're talking about the Desert Fathers. Here is Timo Kriška telling us that we had men and women as great as they were, the Desert Fathers, in prison in the 20th century, bearing witness to Christ. And, through Timo's work as a photographer and in this coffee table book, through my book, Live Not by Lies, but now especially through this documentary, we are going to bring their story to the church and the world so we can learn from them, so we can be inspired by them. And so, God willing, we'll learn to imitate them if it comes down to it for us. And, I think it may. After I got back to Budapest, after I left you all in Bratislava, I had dinner that night with some American evangelicals who were visiting Budapest, friends of friends, and they were interested to know, well, tell us about what you found out. And I gave them sort of a short version of what we had seen and heard, and they were just shaking their heads. They're like, oh, please hurry up with this. The American church needs this in the worst way. And they started telling stories about people falling away from the church, people who are compromising with the world and things like that. They were telling me we need to hear from Christians from an earlier generation who did not do that and who can give us hope that we can resist this new totalitarianism. I said, well, it's coming, believe me. And we've got so much more to film in Hungary and Romania. We're going to try to go to Poland and get some of the Russians out to talk to us. Cannot be more grateful to you, Isaiah, and the team, to our supporters, and to these people, and ultimately to God for making it possible to tell their stories.
Yep. Yeah, I'm in the same boat, Rod. Right back at you with gratitude for teeing this up. Obviously, I mean, so much work went into getting to the point we are now. And yeah, that was one of the funnest things about this is I've been on so many productions, and it's so often the case that there's kind of a core team who really cares, and then there's a whole bunch of other people who just show up because it's a job. And that's just the way it is. It's to be expected. But on this one, even people who came in for a day or two, translators, sound people, we were totally bonded by the end of this because it was so rich, and I don't know if this happened to you, but several of our kind of local helpers at the end of their run were like, thank you so much for including me. Cause I think they felt the power of being able to witness this history firsthand. And again, it's a funny little thing, but one thing that really brought it full circle to me was we trained back from Bratislava to Prague. We were leaving Prague in the airport, and we walk into Václav Havel Airport. And I was thinking, how wild is it that the guy who this airport is named after, helped stage basically the revolution of Czechoslovakia in the apartment that we just camped out in for like 3 straight days. It was absolutely wild. And I wanted to say one more thing on that note, because it was such a interesting through line with everyone that we talked to. Yeah, you were kind of saying people have a hard time or an unwillingness even to sort of trumpet their own bravery, their own courage. Maybe I think in some cases they are even unable to see it. I think part of that was no one was, well, I don't want to say no one, but the mood, it seems, of the day was not, we have to fight the man. I think the mood was, we have to fight for truth. It was not a reactionary movement. It was a movement towards the most important thing. And when that came into conflict with what the government was forcing them to do, that's where it became a revolution of sorts. But it was never a revolution against totalitarianism itself. It was a revolution towards truth. And then that immediately comes into conflict, of course. But that was such an interesting and important distinction for me, because I think that's why these movements were successful long-term, because they were aimed at something so important. And I think it's also in the humility. Like they weren't saying, we know how to reinvent the world. I think what they were saying was, we believe in truth. We believe in the centrality of the church. We believe in these very important things. And you're now taking those away from us. We have to get back to the point where we can have those. And that was such a fascinating and kind of humbling experience to see that firsthand as well.
And do you remember Camilla showed us on her laptop a clip from a 1980s era British TV show about the faces of communism? And they had a British film crew there in their apartment when Camilla and her husband were young, and the kids were small. And we got to see them, young Camilla and young Václav, debating whether or not to fly Czech flags from the window of their apartment to celebrate the anniversary of the communist takeover. And we got to see in real time this young husband and wife, mother and father, talk about, should we do it? And they were talking about how the neighbors in their apartment building, the very building we were, kept telling them, your kids are great, your kids are beautiful, why make it hard for them? Just go ahead and fly the flag. But they realized, and you see them make this decision, we can't do it. We cannot endorse something that is a lie. And so they chose not to fly the flag. Camilla told our crew after she showed us that the state university denied her PhD because they wouldn't fly the flag. Eventually she got it after communism ended. She's a mathematician. But that watching all that and listening to that debate, I thought about the flags that today we're expected to fly, for this or that political cause. And if you don't do it, well, there will be a price to pay. We saw in real time that man and that woman in their apartment. He came home, Václav, from a day shoveling coal. He was an academic, but because he was against communism, they forced him to be a stoker, shoveling coal into a furnace. He came home, sat down, and they talked it out. And it was incredibly powerful. And I thought, how many conversations like that should we be having in our own much different circumstances? But it's the same thing when we are asked to endorse a lie.
You're right. I'm so, speaking of just great serendipitous moments, that's what happens when you just show up with an open mind and a plan, but you just sort of, Camilla said, hey, can I show you this video? It's not very good. It's very old. It's kind of low quality. And within 10 seconds of it starting, I was like, this is gold. It's just incredible. And it was amazing. It's 40 years old, but Oh, it was so good. And you're right. It's so perfectly illustrated the little things. And that's part of what I just to maybe the last thing for me, that was one of the things that was so powerful about this particular branch, I guess, of the story, and specifically learning about the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It was a different, even softer than it used to be type of totalitarianism, even then. Now it's much harder. Of course, it was much more extreme than what we're facing today, and yet it was different than what was happening in the 40s and 50s. I mean, it was things like you can't get a degree. It was things like you're going to have a hard time getting your kids into a certain school. Now, granted, Václav and many other people also went to jail, and that's insane. But I think a lot of people were dealing with the small difficulties even then, and that really resonated with me, because it feels so close to home. It feels so different. Now, granted, understanding and learning more about people who went to prison and died for their faith, I think is also absolutely fascinating and super crucial to what we're doing. But yeah, weirdly, the flag thing totally spoke to me, because you're right. It felt so much like our world. And it was like, this is today and that was today and this is then. It's just like, this is all one history, and we really have to respect that. So in a weird way, the less extreme versions of hard totalitarianism really started to speak to me in a new way.
But do you see now, Isaiah, having spent 8 or 9 days over there with these people, do you have a better understanding about why the immigrants from that part of the world who came to America began to see cancel culture and all of these things happening in America when it really ramped up 7 or 8 years ago? Do you see why they said, watch it, watch out, we've been through this before?
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, no, 100%, because as you say, and I think this is articulated really well in the Torch video and in the book and everything, it doesn't need to look like 1984. It can look very different. And you walk around Prague and you're thinking, this is beautiful, this is so idyllic and all these, but there's this edge to it, because again, that history is so fresh. And I think, yeah, you're 100% right. One of those conversations would have been enough, I think, to convince me that this is all totally justified. But all of them, I think, hit on the same beats, and it was totally fascinating. So
I got to tell you this, and then we can close. Young man I met here, a young Slovak in Budapest yesterday, Samuel, who's part of the fellowship there, the Christian fellowship. He asked me, he said, so who are the Hanus Fellowship people? In Bratislava, it's called the Hanus Fellowship. And they're trying very hard to spread the gospel and prepare Christians for being faithful in the post-Christian public square. And he said, I've been here on a fellowship for 6 months and I haven't seen anything like that here in Budapest. And we kind of talked about that for a bit. And then I said, you know what, Samuel, I think that the reason there's not a place like that, a group like that in Budapest, is because Budapest never had a Father Kolakovic, the priest that we write about in the book, who came there and prepared the underground church for the coming of communism. He was a real prophet who showed up there. He recruited Sylvester Krčmery and a young priest named Vladimir Yukol, and they built the network and they got the people together. And even now, what it's like 80 years later, there is a strong network of young Christian believers in that country who are the grandchildren of Father Kolakovic and Sylvester Krčmery and Vladimir Yukol. And it was just a real moment for me, just sitting there yesterday, listening to this guy, having an ordinary conversation. It was a real moment for me to realize that the work that we do today for the kingdom, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, the church is much more vibrant in Bratislava in the young generation than it is in Prague or Budapest, because of the 1940s, because of the choices that because of what Father Kolakovic told them, and because of the choices that those young Slovaks made to sacrifice everything, put it all on the line for Christ. So the choices we all make today, you and me and everybody listen to this, it's going to make a big difference long after we're gone from this world. That's one of the lessons from this story.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And to bring it back to kind of what we're here to do, I mean, gosh, can you imagine if we were so blessed to even just be able to inspire a couple people, hopefully many more than that, to start to build those types of communities. I mean, you can see the ripple effect that happens over the course of generations. And I think that's a huge push of what this is about. Again, it's not just to say, here's what's wrong. It's about, everybody knows what's wrong to some extent. I mean, well, not everybody, but a lot of people. We got to say, here's what you can do about it, you know, because people want to work, they want to act. So we're excited to be able to give some really terrific examples of people who said, I'm going to do something about it. And now 80 years later, you can see the result of that.
Yeah. And we're not passive here. We don't just have to just say, woe is us. And like Václav Benda, Camilla's late husband, you know, he taught that Christians cannot simply withdraw from the world, that you have a responsibility to bear witness. If you can't do it because of politics or whatever in the mainstream institutions, then build your own institutions. He called it the parallel polis. And that's what they tried to do. And that's what we have to try to do too. When we can't affect the mainstream, we can't just say, well, too bad for us, we can't do it, we tried. No. We've got a responsibility to do more than that, because we don't know what's going to happen next. We interviewed Jan Chornogorski, who was a lawyer who defended Christians and eventually went to prison himself. And he told us that he had the fastest rise of maybe any politician in that part of the world. He was taken out of prison one day and within 2 weeks was sitting at the table with Václav Havel negotiating with the communists for the turnover of power in the Velvet Revolution. And he went on to become the first prime minister of a free Slovakia. And, you know, none of these people thought that they were ever lived to see the end of communism. They did what they did because it was right, because they had to serve the truth and they had to serve the Lord. And look what happened. I mean, what a privilege it is to do this work.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Rod, it was a real privilege, you know, traipsing across Europe with you. I'm excited to do it again soon.
Yeah, well, do we know when the next leg of production is going to start, when I'll see y'all over here on this side again?
We're hoping in January. I don't want to promise that, but that's kind of what we're thinking. So hopefully very soon.
Oh man, that's great. And there's so much to show you here in Hungary about the fight here, and also in Romania. So yeah, got so much more ahead, and I'll tell you again, man, it's such a pleasure to work with y'all. Y'all are all such professionals, and your hearts are open too to this message, and that has been so gratifying to me.
Thanks, man. Likewise, it's been a real pleasure. Okay, cool. Well, we'll talk again soon, and we'll jump back into our broader conversation with RJ. So thanks, Rod. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.